Previously on the Chronic Rift.
But thank you all very much for coming on for the last show. We will be coming back in September, we promise. We're going to be talking about Cyberpunk. What? What's that? What? Hello.
Excuse our intrusion, but is this the Chronic Rift?
Yeah, it is. Who are you?
We represent a party of concerned television people, i.e. the networks, and we don't appreciate this program. Right, fellas? It's too intelligent and too original. Even the Village Voice took notice in their January 8, 1991 issue. I quote Eric Davis. The subculture mimic the mainstream, mocking it, filling in the gaps.
What's that have to do with us?
We don't like it. It makes us look bad. So you gotta stop making the show, see? You, cameraman, stop taking pictures. So, Mr. Comic Man, what have you got to say now?
And now, the conclusion. Oh, my neck. Oh, jeez. Hey, who changed his set around? Andrea, where's that?
What the hell are you?
We are the dork.
I don't get it. You're a dork?
Yes, a dork. I am a member of an advanced species. My brain capacity is 10 times that of yours. That will change, though. My preliminary scans of your people have proven interesting. If the rest of humanity proves as useful as these specimens do...
Specimens?
Yes. Your people will service us, provide us the raw materials to allow us to expand our number. We will bring order to your chaotic lives.
But you can't. Humanity is made up of an infinite diversity of personality as well as ethnic types. In order to be truly human... Hey, I didn't write this stuff. In order to be truly human, one must be truly different. Don't you see?
Oh, I see. The pathetic attempt to try to instill some emotional cord within me.
Well, yeah.
That is impossible. I have no emotions. They hinder you and really embarrass you at the worst possible moments. I will take these humans and be back for more.
No, no, wait, wait! How the hell did he do that? Now what do I do? And where's Andrea? Did they get her?
Did who get me, Keith?
What? Andrea! You're alive!
Yep.
But how?
Well, you fainted after you shot the network executives. You fainted from the shock of handling a weapon bigger than anything you're used to. And John called an ambulance for me. It wasn't too serious. I got out of the hospital last week.
Whoa! Last week?
Yeah,
How long have I been out?
about 4 months.
4 months. You let me sit in that chair for 4 months?
I didn't, but
John, where is he?
I'm right here, Keith. Good
John?
to see you're finally awake, pal. Look, I need a roundtable in about 3 minutes on Cyberpunk. You think you're up to it?
You let me sit in a chair for 4 months?
Well, yeah. I mean, you look so peaceful and all.
Peaceful? I missed the Rocketeer. I missed the season finale to The Next Generation. I missed the finale of Twin Peaks.
the Rocketeer was good. Star Trek: The Next Generation was good. Terminator 2 was good.
Great.
Twin Peaks was awful.
Look, forget that. Did you see the dork?
The Dork.
You know.
That guy from the Doctor Who Society hanging around the studio again?
No, not him. The dork, tall guy, glasses, purple pants, wants to use humanity for reading stock.
That's a good one, Keith. Look, it might be worth a short story or a novelette, but right now, I really need a roundtable on Cyberpunk in about 2 minutes. So why don't you get cleaned up, and Andrea, you can pick a memorable moment from one of the mailbags.
Mailbags.
Yeah, right over there by the desk. We got quite a bit of mail over the summer. There's a bag on top. Hurry up, Keith. We got about 1.5 minutes left.
Yeah, fine.
Mailbags. Coolness. Hey, we have a letter from David Chelsea, singing cartoonist, who says, "Dear Keith and Andrea, here's my question. Given that the reality that Marty McFly, Michael J. Fox, emerges into at the end of Back to the Future has been thoroughly transformed by his time-traveling adventures, what has become of the reality he started off in? My hunch is that if you set up a camera in the parking lot he left from, waiting to film his return, that you could run it forever and McFly would never show up. No one else agrees with me, do you?" Let's see. No. The reality is completely changed. The camera wouldn't be there. The reality wouldn't be there. It's a completely new universe that has been substituted for the old one. Okay? Okay.
Works for me.
Okay. And he also wants a memorable moment from this scene from the 1986 film H.P. Lovecraft's From Beyond. Got that clip, John?
Yeah, just show him what he got for his troubles.
Okay, the man gets some books. He has Inception by W.A. Harbinson and Genesis, also by W.A. Harbinson. This is part of a series. This is cool. And a t-shirt.
Yep, limited edition Chronic Rift t-shirt. We're going to be issuing new ones soon with the newer logo. So if you want an original, order now. Although we're also giving away some cool stuff, and a t-shirt might be among them in the future. I think you ought to take your chances and write and send us a memorable moment. So either way, you get 2 books, but write to us here at the Rift.
I would have enjoyed you in another way. What the hell did you give me? Vibrations look freeze down here. Be right back.
What are you going to do to me?
I'm going to kiss.
The cyberpunk subgenre of SF got its start around about the early 80s. It drew its primary inspiration from a particular technological innovation, the personal computer, as well as the punk movement of rock and roll in the late 1970s. Other secondary inspirations include the proliferation of VCRs, portable phones, MTV, and corporate America in the Reagan years. The best-known cyberpunk authors are Bruce Sterling, who wrote an essay that sort of inspired the movement about how 70s SF was in a rut, as well as novels such as Islands in the Net and a bunch of short stories, and the man who popularized the genre, William Gibson. Gibson, who was the first inductee into the Chronic Rift Hall of Fame, wrote a trilogy of very popular cyberpunk books, the Nebula and Hugo Award-winning Neuromancer, and its sequels Count Zero and Mona Lisa Overdrive. These two paved the way for dozens of cyberpunk authors, including Pat Cadigan, George Alec Effinger, Jack Womack, and many others. With me and Andrea to kick off our second season with a discussion of this peculiar piece of SF prose are, way on the far right there, is Brian Thomsen, an editor at Warner Books who has worked with such authors as Greg Bear and John Shirley. Over on my left is Joe Pierce, a big fan of cyberpunk who is also a neurobiologist and was last on our discussion of alternative comic books way back in November of 1990. And remotely by phone from his home out west is Walter Jon Williams, author of the cyberpunk book Hardwired, as well as the recently released Days of Atonement. You okay there, Walter?
I can hear you.
Okay. There was a tremendous outpouring of cyberpunk for a while there, so much that it was almost became a category unto itself. Joe, what exactly is the particular appeal of cyberpunk that accounts for this rather large amount of popularity?
Well, I think part of it is how the movement used technology as a way of exploring social developments and stuff. I think up to that point, a lot of science fiction really focused on how technology was developed, how it was used by government systems. And cyberpunk has really taken, I think, a perverse pleasure in exploring the way technology can be readapted and used by street-level and underground cultures and individuals. And to that extent, I think that had a lot of appeal to people that read science fiction and were interested in how society was going to develop, how they're going to make use of the new personal computers, the type of interactive systems that have been developed.
Can you think of a particular example? Brian, if you think of something in particular that exemplifies this? Or?
Well, I think that the whole idea that with the personal computer, one can now access information by the second, by the moment, even if one is not authorized to get that information.
Right.
In fact, I agree with everything that Joe has said, with one exception, and that is that I think paranoia plays a very large part, because it is the street-level rebel who is your hero, which therefore indicates that the organization, the establishment, is your enemy. And since they're the big guy and you're breaking into them, they must have more control than you do, and therefore we are back to an Orwellian, Big Brother is watching you through the computer nets.
Yeah, it is very paranoid. I was just thinking of 1984, because in a lot of these cyberpunk books, I mean, everything is known in the net. Everything you do, you're always using a credit card, so you're always being followed. You don't use cash. Everything you're doing is traced, and it's all just information.
And even at its most perfect, the establishment or the organization can control you. I mean, this comes across where we're talking about neurological implants that can adjust your behavior and make you a very happy individual who doesn't make any decisions on his own.
And yet at the same time, I think a lot of the tensions that develop are between that sort of governmental control and use of the technology and the way the same technology is being providing decentralized power to individuals to fight against that system. The same sort of brain implants can provide an individual with a lot of access to information, control of viruses can break into systems, and so you get a lot of ongoing action between these uses of technology.
You played around with that some in Hardwired, Walter, with the different uses of implants, the fact that certain people, the Panzer boys, would use the implants to help them fly, and yet other people would use them as almost as drug addicts. Was there any particular...
Well, this seems to be sort of based on the notion that the technology tends to get smaller. In the Victorian period, you had just enormous iron machines powered by steam that occupied whole buildings. And now to get the same amount of work done, you have much smaller robot-operated devices, and things are getting smaller. And I really do think that soon that we'll have some major hardware that will be small enough to implant in the head. This makes technology a lot more personal, I think, because once it's inside you, you can't, it's going to affect the way you interact with almost everything. I've spoken with a few far-out technologists, one of whom says that it should be possible, say, to code all of the information in the Library of Congress on a sugar cube, which can then be sort of stuck on your head behind your ear, and you can have access to all of that, which is a pretty mind-blowing concept, although it would lead to some really dull conversations because people would be saying, yeah, I know, yes, I know.
Did you think of Hardwired as a cyberpunk book? Just out of, I mean, that's not
I
something.
never heard the word cyberpunk until after I finished the book. I handed it in to my editor, who had, a few months previously at another publishing firm, just finished editing Gibson's Neuromancer. And she said, you realize they're going to call you a cyberpunk? And I said, is that good? You know, the term has never meant a whole lot to me, because I was writing what I was writing about things that I was interested in then, as I'm doing now, and the term got applied later, and it has the advantages and the disadvantages of every label. I think, in terms of the writers who are actually doing this, I think that there has been an overemphasis on the kind of paranoid, down and dirty street side of what's happening. I think a lot of that was a reaction to what was happening in the early 80s with, you know, Gordon Gekko or his real life equivalents chanting "greed is good" like a mantra, and the conglomeratization that's still going on. I think, more importantly, what cyberpunk is a way of looking at the future as a very dense, interrelated, different place from where we are now.
That sort of leads me to another question, which is something that a number of authors and editors have said to me, at least, is that cyberpunk is dead. Is it really dead, Brian? Do you see it as somebody in the field, as an editor?
Well, the first mention of cyberpunk outside of the science fiction field in my life was when I got a call from one of the sales reps who said, which of the books on your list is cyberpunk, because they tell us that it's selling really good right now, and if we can call the book cyberpunk, it'll sell better. And then 6 months later, I got a call from the same rep who said, cyberpunk isn't selling anymore. Which books on the list should I consider cyberpunk? And you know, obviously I changed the name each time because in reality it has been a very, very retro label. I think that maybe 100 years from now there will be a cyberpunk manifesto done by Oxford or something, which will bring it back as far as probably Alfie Bester's books, and would probably include Steve Donaldson's current Gap cycle right now as a cyberpunk book, even though that's not being called a cyberpunk book. So in reality, is it dead? I don't think cyberpunk is dead. I just think people aren't using the label anymore.
Well, that's like some people who write horror novels but sell them as thriller novels, because if they see horror, then only a select audience will want to go see it.
Walter, do you see that as limiting being labeled a cyberpunk author necessarily?
Well, it's only labeling. It's only limiting insofar as people are willing to limit the label. That's why I, for example, would kind of like to expand the definition. I think the way that cyberpunk looks at the future, and the way that the writers who write it look at the future, is somewhat different from traditional SF. In traditional SF, the future tends to be a bit homogenized, and people are living in the same sort of dwellings, and they have the same sort of technology, and it's all rather middle American. And
Cyberpunk is not middle American.
What contemporary reality is showing us is that the future is going to be diverse. It's not going to be homogeneous. There's going to be a lot of third world in the future. If we expand, for example, into space, there's a lot of room up there. There's a lot of room for different cultures and attitudes and traditions. I think that that attitude, that emphasis, that style, may be giving us a more sort of dense-packed view of what the future may bring us.
You mentioned before middle-class values, and how it sort of subverts that. Can you think of a specific example of something that would really?
Well, I mean, the emphasis, say, in some of William Gibson's writings on individuals that are trying to live without an identity, there are a couple individuals in the second book that were born for one reason or another without any form of birth tag, and so they have a certain advantage. They can then use cards and other things, and trying to live anonymously. I mean, in a way, maybe middle-class values do also involve living anonymously, but if you project into the future where all that sort of middle-class America is being controlled or at least monitored, then living outside of that, even if itself is sort of a revolutionary position, allows you to move freely, which is one of the situations that I think a lot of cyberpunk writers are pushing towards, is showing individuals trying to behave freely in a society that's trying to control them.
Well, one of the things in Greg Bear's books is that, particularly in Queen of Angels and to a certain extent in Eon and Eternity, is the fact that through implants we can have people become therapied and better adjusted. Whenever I hear people being better adjusted, I think of Ward and June Cleaver, and you can't really get more middle America than that. And in reality, middle America becomes, again, homogenized, which is just the opposite of what the future should hold. And therefore, this whole implant neurological of making you feel better is making you more like everyone else. And maybe, being like everyone else will be better, but it won't necessarily be what's original. And more than that, you won't be you anymore.
And yet it's always somebody's personality, especially in all the books where they focus on a particular character, where somebody's personality can really take over the whole thing. Pat Cadigan's Sinners, the visual mark winds up taking over a whole system, and then his body has a stroke and it affects the entire net. In Islands in the Net, one particular person has a great influence on how things happen, so the individuality is still there. It just expresses itself a lot differently, and sometimes it's a lot more widespread because everything is so interconnected. If you get one really particularly powerful person, it can change everything.
Or you can take away all the power from that person. Because indeed, if that person becomes like everyone else, they therefore lose their charisma because they are no longer discernible from any other individual. I mean, if Richard Nixon was like everyone else, he never would have become president of the United States. Nor would Joe McCarthy, nor would Adolf Hitler, nor would Pope John Paul II.
Pope John Paul II became president of the United States.
Don't be so loud.
No, that's, I noticed that's a focus in a lot of the books. I was just reading some stuff in Crystal Express by Sterling, and in that, you have lots of things where the opposition doesn't want a lot of small groups, because small groups will be more inventive and they'll think for themselves. So they just want a big group that'll get all tied up with a lot of bureaucracy. One thing that I found, this is just a general overview of Cyberpunk from someone who was just reading it over the summer to be prepared for this, is that I was sometimes off-put by the amount of technology that was in. I found that it sometimes detracted from the story. Then again, I'm not very technologically oriented. I mean, I just liked the reading, and I like the stories, and I like the characters, particularly in Gibson's trilogy. I'd really get into the characters. I'd get into Molly, and I'd get into Case. But then it would be, well, then, you know, he takes his super robotic eyes and he does this, and then he does this into the Matrix, and then he does this. And I found that detracting and confusing. I mean, is this common, or is it just me not being with it?
Well, I think that part of it goes along the lines of I've done all this research, and by God, I'm going to put it in there, which I prefer to call Tom Clancy syndrome. But in reality, I think it's the only way that you can convey the texture of the world that you're living in, because it is a different world than the world we're living in. And by putting in that detail of intricacy and complexity, you immediately feel the alienness of what we can become.
Yeah, well, as with any literary effort, it can be done well, or it can be done not so well. I think if it's done well, the intrusion of all of this technology becomes pretty transparent. You can see through it to what the people are doing. But still, any reasonable projection of the future, assuming that some hideous disaster doesn't overtake us all, is going to have to deal with things like genetic engineering and mind-machine interface and nanotechnology and virtual reality/cyberspace, which is in the process of being created by young technophiles who were inspired by Neuromancer.
Okay, we have to stop there. We're being given the wrap it up sign. This is a very nice discussion. Thank you all for coming on.
Thank you.
And what are we doing next week?
Star Trek.
Yes. Oh, yes, the 25th anniversary of Star Trek next week. Don't miss it. It's going to be spectacular. We'll see you then.
Good night.
This episode was sponsored in part by Comics Interview, the magazine where both the fans and the pros turn to see who's who and how it's done. Read Comics Interview number 100 and see who the 100 most powerful people in the comics industry are. For a free catalog, write to Comics Interview, 234 Fifth Avenue, Suite 301, New York, New York, 10001. Tor Books, publishers of fantasy and science fiction books available at your local bookstore, including 3 new releases from some of the best cyberpunk authors. Ambient by Jack Womack, to be released in September. Halo by Tom Maddox, on sale in November. And Days of Atonement by Walter Jon Williams, available in paperback in December. Worlds of Wonder, fantasy and science fiction artworks, featuring painting and sculpture by some of the best artists in the field, including Dean Morrissey, James Warhola, Wendy Ross, David Mattingly, J.K. Potter, and many others. For more information, write to Worlds of Wonder, 3421 M Street Northwest, Suite 327, Washington, D.C., 20007, or call 202-298-7889 and ask for Jane Frank.